Hello, strangers. Don't touch that dial. You've tuned in to Neon Static, where every week you get one true scary story you won't find anywhere else. Subscribe for reminders, and like and comment if you feel like it. I'm your host, Vi, as in Viola, because someone guessed violin, and you know what? That's close enough for government work. Also, someone else guessed vibrator, and man, I just couldn't let that stand. With that mystery solved, allow me to bring another from a deep pool, the mysteries of parenting. I wouldn't know myself, but from what I hear, every day has its ups and downs. Even in the mundane, there's always something unexpected. This story is story 178, and here's what happened. My wife and I have 2 children. Our daughter, Gloria, is 2. Our son, Mason, came earlier this year. My wife has always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Thankfully, we've managed to find the right job in the right city for both of us to get what we dreamed. But that's not to say there aren't those days. Gloria is fully into her terrible 2s. Even though Mason hasn't yet managed walking, teething has introduced a new wailing to the household soundtrack. My wife has said she can't complain. This was what she always wanted for her life. And I believe her, to a point. But a few nights of coming home to her eyes looking not unlike the Muppet Animal, and, well, I waited until the next morning, but brought up a nanny or daycare. She was more amenable, though, to a defined schedule. With me working on 410, that's 10 hours Monday through Thursdays, the easiest and what works for us is that I am primary house spouse Friday through Sunday. It's not completely even, but my wife looks about 1,000,000 times happier come Sunday night than she had been. In spite of that benefit, it was one of those weekends a month or so back when this happened. That Friday, my wife headed out for a few appointments. Nails, I think, hair too. I'd gotten up with Mason, bottle-fed him, and then poured cereal for Gloria that she promptly shoved off her tray table and onto the floor. As it turned out, that day her favorite cereal was no longer her favorite on account of being too small. It was Cheerios. I pride myself on being a good, attentive father. I took her complaint in stride, even treated it as a riddle. Too small. But she likes the shape. Maybe she was asking for bagels. I was considering a DoorDash order, feeling like super dad for figuring out something innovative, fun, and feasible, all without making that dreaded text to their mom. I was smiling as I asked her if she wanted plain or cinnamon swirl, smug that I'd figured it all out. My daughter looked me dead in the eye, and then projectile vomited across my chest. The chest against which I rested my son to burp him, meaning all 3 of us were ground zero in the splash zone. He immediately began crying, and for a moment I thought, well, hell, me too, kid. Some super dad. That sarcasm, though, it dropped real quick when I pressed my palm to my daughter's forehead and nearly ripped my hand away from the unexpected heat. Gloria was burning up. I pulled her out of the high chair, then carried them both upstairs to the shower to at least get a rinse off for the vomit. Then it was to my phone to find the nearest urgent care. There was a newer one I didn't recognize closest to us, about 15 miles away. With my daughter's face reddening and her eyes getting that far-away, glassy look, I didn't figure I had time to waffle over clinics. I got us all dressed, strapped into the car, and we were off. The clinic was in an area I didn't know too well. In spite of being close, it just wasn't near or on the way to anything I ever needed. When we got there, the parking lot was practically empty. So was the front office. I was greeted by a woman in lilac scrubs who took my name, then offered the usual clipboard with the sheet of questions about names, birth dates, all of that. Gloria may have been waylaid by whatever bug she'd picked up, but her terrible twos were beginning to overpower it. I was juggling Mason and the clipboard, but also trying to mind Gloria as she began to fuss. She felt bad, and she was about to do what Big Bird taught her and share it. The magazines on the coffee table were the first casualties, as she began trying to push all of them off onto the floor. That had me dropping the clipboard to catch one of her chubby arms. Then it was exploring the potted ferns, digging her fingers into the dirt to flick up and out of the pot, making more of a mess. Somehow I managed to get her corralled and most of the form filled out before a different nurse, in the same light purple scrubs, opened the door into the waiting room and called for us. Juggling Gloria's hand, the baby, and the clipboard, I followed the nurse. She was power walking down the hallway. The other connecting rooms zipped by as we walked behind her. In my periphery, I saw empty waiting rooms, a supply closet, and emerging from a bathroom, yet another nurse. This one in pastel baby pink scrubs. She looked startled as we loped by, but I caught the crinkle of her eyes as she caught sight of Mason firmly wedged in my arms. A familiar sight. I'm biased that my son is adorable, but I have it on the authority of strangers that he's cute. Wherever I take him, he consistently draws coos and excited, high-pitched compliments. Still, Purple Nurse number 2 wasn't pausing, so we barreled down the hallway after her, up until she came up short at the last waiting room in the hallway. She whisked us inside, then told us the doctor would be in shortly before leaving. She left the door half open in her wake. I sat Gloria on the exam table, whereupon I learned her newly formed opinion on the paper as too crackle. Sensing his sister's distress, Mason began to whimper-mutter. I patted his diaper, fearing he'd need changed again. And that's when Pink Nurse wandered through the door. Whatever fire her purple-clad coworker was running around addressing, Pink Nurse didn't appear to know about it. She smiled warmly, complimented Mason's round, chunky cheeks. I smiled and then half-turned, expecting the follow-on compliment for my daughter, but it never came. Pink Nurse was 1,000% focused on Mason, near staring. Then her eyes shifted to mine, then down to my clipboard. She said, "If you'd like," in a warm, grandma-made cookies voice, "I can take him. We have a room for infant care. It has bassinets and everything." She was already reaching out her hands as if I'd said yes, and normally I think I would have accepted. I still needed to finish the forms on the clipboard, and Gloria was now looking around. Fever or no fever, her eyes glittered as she looked for the next thing to break, send to the ground, or otherwise meddle with like a raccoon in Oshkosh Bagosh overalls. And human nature. If someone reaches out to you to pass something, you automatically extend your arms to them. I had in fact lifted my son up, as though to meet those expectant hands. But Pink Nurse seemed so intent, eager even. I can't explain it better than that. Maybe, too, was the snubbing of my equally adorable daughter having me on edge. Or maybe it was the barf shower we'd all just had. All I could describe it as is that something in her didn't pass the sniff test. So I told her no thanks. I pulled my arm back, my son to my chest. She paused, her arms in midair, her eyebrows raising in surprise. She asked, Are you sure, dear?" I smiled, hoping to not make it awkward, but I told her we were a pretty smelly crew that day, and I appreciated her offer nonetheless. To her credit, she shrugged, smiled, and then left the room. I felt a little embarrassed at how nonchalant her response to my no was. Like I'd assumed she'd have more of a bad reaction to it, maybe get mad. For what? Because she was too willing to help? Too nice about it? Well, maybe Gloria got her judgy pronouncements from her old man. I got one more question filled in and heroically saved a pack of one-use face masks from falling onto the floor before the doctor arrived in the room. 5 minutes later, and we had the extremely specific diagnosis of a bug that had been going around, and he advised we do Sudafed about it. It may have been a poor use of a $70 copay, but for the peace of mind it brought, well worth it. The doctor was up and leaving the room before I could ask follow-on questions. One of the purple nurses came back in to both hand me papers and retrieve my just-finished clipboard forms. But that's when Mason began to cry a healthy, bleeding wail. In juggling forms and prescriptions and baby in my daughter's chubby hand, I laughed at myself, then made the comment that I should have just listened to the nice woman and accepted her help. The nurse in purple paused. "What nice woman?" she asked. I looked up, meeting her eye, telling her, the other one, in the hallway. "Is someone talking about me?" A voice came as the first purple nurse, the one in reception, came into the exam room. I just smiled and shook my head, and then I turned to keep an eye on my devious little daughter. I told them that, no, I meant the one in pink scrubs, the older lady. I expected to hear one or both of them reply, say something like, "Oh yes, Nurse What's-Her-Name, how could we forget?" But their silence was loud enough to have me returning my gaze to their faces. There was no recognition there. They were completely blank. A blip of unease gurgled through my stomach. It made me feel nervous to see them look so confused. More to myself than them, I continued, saying, "Yes, the lady in the pink scrubs. She offered to take Mason to the nursery." And then I stopped myself and corrected it, because she didn't call it a nursery, did she? No, she called it infant care. I watched their eyes, my own ping-ponging back and forth between them. Again, looking for that recognition, the confusion driven away by embarrassed smiles. And I did get a reaction. But it was more confusion from Purple Nurse number 2, and Purple Nurse number 1's face going sheet white. She stammered, the older lady?" Her eyes wide. I watched the confusion flush from the second nurse's face as she turned, her own features stretching with concern and worry. I nodded as, thinking back, there weren't any other women I'd seen that morning in the clinic waiting room. There'd been no one at all, just me and the kids. The second nurse spoke now, her eyes flitting back to me. "We don't wear pink scrubs." But she was cut off by the first nurse. "The older lady. She startled me by coming up to my desk. She wanted to know what the doctor said was wrong with the baby, when the next appointment would be." The second nurse's neck audibly cracked as she whipped her face back to the first nurse, who continued speaking. "She said she was the kid's grandma. I told her I didn't know just yet, but she could wait in the waiting room for y'all to be done." We all stood there, looking at each other for a moment, before Purple Nurse number 2 sprang into action, leaving the room and striding back down the hall. In spite of all of the surprise that morning, her yelled response of, "There's no one here. She left," coming echoing down the hall. That was no surprise at all. Couple things. The urgent care clinic had no idea who that woman was. She wasn't a patient of theirs, nor a walk-in from that morning. I'm given to understand from the limited CCTV that she came in through a back door, propped open for airflow and for the nurses to take quick, convenient breaks. The police were no help whatsoever. That's the second thing. They took my statement and they took the footage, but their attitude is more on the line of, well, nothing happened, so what do you want? And fine, sure, I'll admit there's no conclusive evidence that the woman wanted anything, let alone to steal my son. Except, of course, there's the third thing. That clinic, it doesn't have an infant care room. If I had taken her up on her offer, where would she have taken him? Story 178. He never went back there, of course. Can you blame him? There's such a betrayal in this story. I mean, you're a parent. You're trying to take care of your kids. Kids who threw up on you. That's some real unconditional love. You go out and you find a doctor at a moment's notice. You make it work. And for your trouble, someone tries you. They're dressed right. They act right. And you're tired. You're panicked. You're a little distracted. It's so easy to picture making a mistake. Just 2 seconds of the loss of awareness. And that's it. It still bothers my friend. He tells me that when he takes the kids out to the supermarket or Target or whatever, he's always looking around. And when I asked him what he looks for, thinking I could pass some tips off to you guys, his response makes my blood run cold. He told me what he looks for are those pale, baby pink scrubs. Has this ever happened to you, or something like it? Feel free to share. You can do so either VFR direct to me with the email and socials in the description, or by commenting here. Liking and subscribing is appreciated too, of course. But I'm just so glad you tuned in this week. And I'll be looking for you next week, Tuesdays at 3 p.m. PST, when we'll do it all over again. And until then, keep your head on a swivel and take care, strangers.